Hey folks, welcome back. I'm David and we're here in my shop where I build E-War guitars. Well, welcome to episode 6 in the tutorial series on how to build an electric guitar. And in this video, we're going to work on taking some rough lumber like this piece 8/4 walnut right here, and we're going to turn it from that and we're going to start making our body parts right here. Like these guys, the top, and this is the body right here out of a piece of mahogany. Anyway, we're going to use a combination of some hand tools, and we're going to use some of those power tools over there to get the job done. And of course, we're going to use the templates that we just created in the last video in this series. Anyway, hope you all stick around and watch it, and I hope you dig it. And if you do dig it, I hope you give me a like and subscribe. Anyway, let's get rolling with the video. Okay, so it's time to make some sawdust out of wood instead of MDF. This is where it starts getting exciting for me. Anyway, so I've got laid out before me some of the wood that's going to go into this guitar. What I've got here, I'll go down each of the pieces. So this is a piece of black walnut. You can see it's got a beautiful straight grain to it. It's a piece 8/4 and it's around 7 inches wide and about 19 inches long. Now I know I was talking about using Cerakote this whole time on the top of this guitar, but I've decided to make these tops about 3/4 of an inch thick if you followed along when we were doing the design on this. And the piece of Cerakote I got is just not quite thick enough to book match a piece that's 3/4 of an inch thick, and I want the top to be book match because that just looks better. So anyway, so I've switched a little bit and I've decided to go with this beautiful piece of black walnut. So that's going to be the top. This piece right here is a piece of Honduran mahogany, genuine mahogany. It's also a piece of 8/4, and that's going to be the main part of the body, the back of the body. And if you remember, this has got to be cut down to 1 1/8 inch thick as a finished thickness on that. So we got a little bit of work to do on this guy too to get him going. That is one piece too. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that is a one piece Honduran mahogany, beautiful piece of wood. Okay, so that's going to be the two main components in the body. I'm also going to have edge banding on it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use maple or red heart edge banding, or maybe even both. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm still thinking about that. When you're building your own, you can kind of figure it out as you go sometimes. Anyway, so now for the neck, I've got this piece of 4/4 flamed maple, which is a beautiful piece of wood. I don't know if you can see the flaming in that, but it's really a spectacular piece of wood. It's got some staining on it from, when it was milled and shipped and been laying around here for quite a while too. But anyway, so that's going to be my neck. Now, that's of course a flat sawn piece of wood, but what I do with these, because it's a multi-laminate neck, I could rip this down into, I'm going to start with 1.5 inches wide, and then I'm going to turn them up on edge and laminate them together with some red heart stripes in the middle, probably red heart and black walnut in the middle for the tapered stripes. And that does a couple things. It first of all allows me to use a thinner piece of wood, and it also turns this piece of flat sawn wood into a piece of a vertical grain wood too, which I believe is a little bit stronger for the neck. So the grain is going to be going vertically through the thickness of the neck. And that's what we're going to do with that guy there too. So, but we're not doing the neck in this video. We'll be working on that on the next one. But for now, let me put these two guys aside. Okay, and let's talk about these two guys here for a minute. So we got our black walnut top, we got our mahogany body. This guy here is 8/4, okay? And what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to cut two pieces that'll ultimately be 3/4 of an inch thick when they get glued together. So I'm gonna wind up, I'll probably resaw these down to about 13/16, maybe a little bit more than that, each of them. And then we're gonna have a little thin leftover piece off of this edge, probably 1/8, maybe 3/16 left off of this side. Depends on how it goes while we're flattening this thing. But anyway, so we're gonna get ready to do that. And before I do that, as you can see, this wobbles a little bit. So we can't resaw this and everything until we have to have at least one face perfectly flat and then one edge joined square with the face. So we're going to work on that first, and I'll actually probably flatten one side and plane the other one so they're both parallel. So when I get my slice taken off of this thing for the headstock cap, it'll already have one flattened surface on it. So, okay, and we're going to do basically the same thing with this piece of Honduran mahogany. We're going to flatten it so, so it lays nice and flat. We're going to flatten one side on the router sled. We're going to flip it over, run it through. Now this one I'm going to have to run through my drum sander since my planer is not wide enough to take this bigger piece of wood. We're going to flatten the other side on the drum sander to match the first side, and we're going to join one edge. And this body is going to be, if you remember from the design, this part of the body is going to be 1 1/8 inches thick. So I'll probably resaw it at first down to about 1 1/4 inches, and I'll take it down the rest of the way on my drum sander to get it to the precise thickness I need, which I probably won't do that until after I've made the top so I know exactly how thick my top is going to be. Anyway, so this piece we're going to resaw off of this. I'm then also going to use that to make my control cavity cover for the back side. And I'm going to make sure to line up where my control cavity cover goes, so where it's in the same spot as the actual back of the guitar where that control cavity is going to be. So, so the grain will kind of line up. I mean, it probably won't be an absolute perfect lineup, but it's going to be awfully close. But anyway, so that's what we're going to do at first. We're going to get set up over my router sled, and we're going to start planing these jokers down and get them good and flat on one side. So let me get set up over there, and I'll bring you back in a second. So this is my router sled. Very simple, but very effective tool at the same time. And as you can see, I'm using, these are like tongue depressors or popsicle sticks or whatever. I use just whatever. Stick it in the corners, find the, find what works to keep that thing from rocking and keep it all pretty equal. I try not to raise one corner too much further than the other, just enough to keep it from moving around. And sometimes, like a popsicle stick is too thick, so you'll stack up some tape or whatever. Just use whatever you got to use to get it to lay in there real stable and flat. Once you got it good, then I just screw a little block of wood on either end just to kind of clamp it together. You don't have to get crazy with clamping it in place. Just a couple of boards to keep it from sliding around works good. Keep it staying on top of those, on top of your shims. Now I go around and I'll check that router. I'll drop it down to what looks like the lowest point to me. And I'll go around, I'll check several spots, and I'll just start running it back and forth. And it'll take anywhere from nothing off to, who knows, depending on how bent the board is, it'll take a lot. But if you see that spot right there, I realized there's actually a lower spot than I found before, so I stopped and reset it. And of course, this time I put some pencil marks on there so I can see what the heck I'm taking off. But then I just kind of run through it. Just slide it back and forth. By the way, a little bit of wax on those rails helps a lot. Keeps that aluminum sliding nice. Then I check it with my precision straight edge to make sure it's all looking good. And of course I go through the same process on the next piece too. This one, no popsicle sticks that fit. I just use stacks of tape in a couple of corners there to get it to stop moving. So once the one side has been flattened on the router sled, I'll take it over and I'll start running it through the planer with, of course, the flat side down because the cutter head's on top. So once it comes out of that planer, then I always check the thickness to check all four corners basically to make sure it's right. And that has both sides parallel. Then I just take them both and I'll run them through my joiner then to get the edge square. Okay, so that went pretty well. I've got both these guys, my walnut and my mahogany. I've got them surfaced on both sides. They're perfectly parallel and they have a nice consistent thickness going through. So both faces on both of these are good, and also joined one edge, and I checked and they're square. Came out perfectly square. You got to do this before you set it up on that resaw bandsaw and cut them down to thickness. You got to make sure these boards are in really good shape, or the board will walk all over on you. It'd be very difficult. So anyway, I came up with another idea, and I want to show you. I think it's going to be pretty cool. I had this piece of, I've got a couple pieces of this maple veneer, and it's a 1/16 of an inch thick veneer. And I also have some curly maple binding that's 1/4 by, oh, it's probably 60 thousandths of an inch, I think. And also have some red heart binding too. Now, if you remember, I told you I was going to do the stripes in the back out of this Red Heart wood. These are going to make the stripes in the neck. So I got to thinking about using this Red Heart also on the binding. And I have some of this. And I'm thinking about doing a double binding. I hope I can do it. I've never done it before. But anyway, I remembered about that veneer. So this is what I'm thinking of doing. Let me see if I can angle that camera down here a little bit better and show you what I'm talking about. And the reason I'm stopping and doing this right now is, and thinking about this now is because when I cut my thicknesses of both the top and the body, I've got to have this in mind when I do it, or I'll get my thicknesses off and I'll have to do extra work. So anyway, this is what I'm thinking about doing. So this is going to be the back of the guitar, the body. And this is going to be the top. I'm going to split this in two, and I want ultimately my top to be 3/4 of an inch thick. Okay. So what I'm thinking about doing, if I laminate this maple to the back of this top, I'll have a maple, basically when it gets glued together, I'll have a maple edge showing all the way around the edge of the guitar. So what I'm thinking about doing, I guess it'll kind of look like this. So that'll go over here. And then if I did a double binding on it, put on the maple first, and then the Red Heart, okay, I'm going to wind up with, I hope you can see that. Let me see if I tilt it up a little bit. I'm going to wind up with I better put on my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. So I'll have a Red Heart face of the binding, and it's going to be surrounded on both sides. You'll have maple under it and maple inside of it. I think that'll look really cool. So anyway, I'm thinking that's a pretty cool idea. Have a Red Heart binding that's bordered by maple on the inside. So the maple will be up against the walnut, and it'll be bordered by maple underneath of it, which will go in between the Red Heart and the mahogany. I think that's going to be pretty cool. Let me know what you think in the comments. And another part of the coolness of that, I think, is I'm using the same woods in the neck, only different proportions of them. I'm going to use, the main bulk of the neck will be maple, and I'm going to use Red Heart stripes up the thing, and I'm going to border either side of the Red Heart stripes with the walnut. I think it's going to be pretty cool. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. So whenever I go to resaw something, I always like going back and checking my fence, make sure it's running true. And then I'll also check the tracking on it too to make sure it's tracking properly with that blade, because you don't want to get about halfway through one of those wide pieces of wood and it screws up on you, you know. Of course, I always take a little tester piece and I check my thickness. You know, I check the width of my cut before I start cutting on it. And it went really well. Real nice clean cut. Now before I cut off the second one, I'll run that thing through my planer a couple of times to take off all those bandsaw marks to kind of re-true up the board before I cut my second slab out of there. Got a real nice 1/8 inch thick piece left over off the end too for my headstock plate. Now I'm going to thickness both of those so they're get the rest of the bandsaw marks off and get them exactly thickness right so I can glue them up in my clamp. Now I'll set it up again. I'm going to saw up the piece of mahogany now too. Basically following all the same stuff. That's a big piece of wood. I go very, very slow doing it. Now I'll send it through my drum sander just to true it up. Okay, so I think that went pretty well. I got my mahogany blank cut down to the thickness. This is about 1/16 of an inch over. Came out real flat on both sides. And it looks good, and I've got my piece left off of the back. That guy's pretty thick. But I'm going to be cutting my control cavity cover out of this, and I'll save the rest for something else. I wound up with about 1/8 of an inch piece of the walnut, the black walnut for my headstock veneer. So that's pretty cool. I still got to flatten off that side there, but it looks good too. And I've got these guys right here for the black walnut top. They're about 1/16 of an inch over, I guess. I've still got to run them through. Once I glue them together, I'm going to run them through my drum sander to bring them to the exact right thickness. And and I've also got to glue that maple on the back of this, that maple veneer on the back of this thing. I decided I'm going to go ahead and do that. So anyway, let me bring in closer here. Okay, so I ran these guys through the joiner after I resawed them down to the right thickness and ran them through the planer a couple times to get them right. And I've got them through. Now, if you look carefully, that joint's not terrible. If I move it around a little bit, it's not terrible, but it's also not great either. And I want this thing to fit just naturally laying there by itself to a condition that looks perfect. And it's not quite there yet. So I got out my shooting board and I tuned up my plane iron over here. And we're going to go ahead and plane each of these edges, because in my opinion, that's the only way to get them exactly right, is to use a shooting board and a plane, and that'll get them just as perfect as I can get it anyway. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to straighten up these two edges and get them ready to go up in my glue up clamp, and then we're going to straighten up the two edges of this veneer too and get those ready to go. And these we're going to glue them up a little different way. We'll get to that in just a second. Anyway, well, let me set up this shooting board and we're going to start planing these guys right now. My shooting board clamped in here, got it held down with those bench dogs. Got my board pushed up tight. It's hanging over here just a smidge past the little lip. I got the thing waxed up and ready to go. That looks good. Now, if you notice, I ran this grain so the grain's running out in this direction, the direction of the plane's going. This is actually going to wind up being the top. Okay? So let me get this guy in here. This one's going to go the other way. See how that fits. My goodness. I hope you could see that. That's perfect. That is absolutely perfect right there. That looks really good. I hope I can get a close-up of that to show you. So it not only fits on the top, if I flipped it over, it ought to fit on the backside too, because they're perfectly square with each other. Yep, fits there too. That means I have a good consistent joint, that the thickness of the joint is going to be touching all the way down the thing. That's just really, that looks really good. I think that's going to turn out really nice. So that guy right there is ready to get glued up in my clamp. All right, so now I'm going to follow basically the same process with this veneer. Although it's only about a 1/16 of an inch thick, so to hold it down, I hold a piece of MDF on top of it. And I run it. Now these weren't very straight coming out of the package. So what I did is I marked the middle where it needed to go, and I just kind of start in the middle, and then I work my way with longer passes on the plane to get the hump out of each side. And I did that a couple times and it worked out good. It turned out really tight and nice and beautiful. So I'm going to glue them up right here. I got a little piece of wax paper laying on the bottom. I'm just going to pull them really tight together with a piece of tape. And I'll tape it in 3 spots, and I'm going to run a long piece of tape all the way along that joint. Okay? Now I flip it over and I just put a little something in there to hold it up, to open up that joint. Drizzle a little glue in there, try to get the excess off. And then I'll drop it down. I put another piece of wax paper on top, and then that piece of MDF. And that'll just hold it down tight, and that tape on the back is actually the clamp that is holding it together. It pulls it tight together. And that worked out really well. And this is my glue jig I use for gluing up all these types of parts. Whether or not I'm gluing on a laminate or I'm gluing 2 pieces together, it kind of keeps everything laying really flat. I'm trying to get some of that excess glue off, because you don't need a whole lot of glue. Of course, I put wax paper on the top and the bottom to keep my keep that piece of wood from getting glued to my clamp. That clamp works really nice. Very simple thing to build. It's got some bolts in it, and I just crank them down. I left slots in the side where I can get those long clamps in there too. So while that's drying, I pulled this out of its clamp. I'm just using a scraper to get rid of that excess glue. Now, to make sure that that surface I'm going to glue against is really consistent, I'm going to go ahead and tack that piece of veneer down to a nice flat piece of MDF, and I'm going to run it through my drum sander over there, just to flatten that one surface off really nice. Just make sure there's nothing on there. All right, so this thing came out beautiful. I love it. Simple but elegant. I mean, a beautiful, looks like a pair of hands coming together or something to me. Anyway, the next thing we got to do now, and the last thing we got to do to really prep this, is we need to glue on our laminate here. So this is our laminate, and I ran it through the sander on this side, so it's perfectly flat. We got that glued up yesterday. So one thing that's very important is when you're doing this, is this laminate, this piece of veneer, as soon as that moisture from the glue hits it, it's going to start trying to move. So it's going to start absorbing that moisture, and it's going to start bowing up on us and everything else. So, and I want to be absolutely sure that the center line of this piece of veneer and the center line of the walnut there is in perfect alignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this guy right here, which is a side marking dot, just a piece of PVC plastic or ABS plastic, and it's 3/32 in diameter. We're going to do a couple of indexing pins first. So when I go to smearing the glue on this thing, and I drop this veneer on top, it is going to drop right into my indexing pins, and I'll know I will have a good lineup. So I'm happy with that. So I got my drill. This is a 3/32 drill bit. And I got my drill right here. Now I've marked the top and bottom of this guitar, so I'm gonna keep these indexing pins right in the center. I don't want to go on the two sides here because, like I said, when I lay that, I'm going to glue the back of the walnut first, but when I put that piece of veneer, this maple veneer on it, that veneer is going to automatically start soaking up the moisture, and it's going to start swelling and everything. So I'd rather have these guys in line here on the center line, so if it swells out, it'll still remain centered here. If I put them on these edges and it starts swelling where it's bowing up in the middle, I'm not really sure where it's going to land when I put it in the press and push it down. So anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. Get one right here. And another one right up here. So now I'm over here gluing it up, putting a little bit of glue on that piece of black walnut. Not too much. I'm using a little scrap of that veneer to spread it out a little bit. It's important not to just overload it with glue, because then you just get a mess on everything, you know? Just one nice thin layer. And if you notice too, I put a piece of MDF on top of that to make sure I have a really consistent press on that piece of veneer going down onto the piece of black walnut. Just holds it really nice and consistent. I give it a couple hours and then out it comes out of the clamp. I think I left it in there 2.5 hours, something like that, which is plenty. And it turned out really nice. Really flat, center's lined up really well, just looks really good. Now it's time to cut out the bodies. A lot of guys like to do all their routing and all that type of thing before they cut out the body, but I just like cutting out the bodies. I don't know why. I guess I feel more like I'm working on a guitar rather than a slab of wood. I'm just taking them both out and cutting out both the piece of mahogany and that piece of walnut on the bandsaw. I cut them just a little big. They're probably a 1/16 beyond, maybe as much as 1/8 of an inch beyond the line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the mahogany part of the body, which is the main part of the body, off of the template, so it'll be exactly cut to size with that router. And I won't do that on the walnut part until it's actually glued onto the mahogany, and I will route the walnut with the edge of the router tracing on the mahogany part of the body. And that's about it. Just clean up that one edge and I'm ready to put it in the hot box. Well folks, I appreciate you watching, but we better leave it there for now. We got these body parts ready to go, and now that all this cutting and everything was done in these guys right here, I mean an awful lot of wood was moved, and these guys were cut and re-glued together, and I laminated it back on the thing. It's going to be good for them to go into my hot box. I got a drying box, got a heat lamp and a dehumidifier in it, and let these guys stabilize over the next several days while I'm working on the neck parts. Anyway, I really appreciate you all watching. I enjoy the heck out of doing this stuff, and I hope somebody got something out of it. Anyway, God bless you all, and y'all have a wonderful week, and we'll see you all in the next one.